If your readers can't focus on your writing, it's not their fault. It's yours. Many readers complain that they're too distracted to read, and even when they do, they don't remember anything. It's in one eye and out the other. Sure, you can blame TikTok scrolling, lowering IQs, or why not? Carol Baskin down in Florida, but the best writers know that good writing is no accident. It's the result of careful design. Luckily, designing writing that sticks in your reader's brain is surprisingly simple when you understand reader psychology. So in this video, we're gonna look inside your reader's brain to learn 4 writing hacks for memory and attention. You can use these hacks to design user-friendly writing that your readers will find irresistible and unforgettable. As an English professor, I work with a lot of scientists and engineers, and whenever they ask me, how can I improve my writing, my answer usually surprises them. I say, you already learned everything you need to be a great writer in your computer science class. Think about it, writing is just like coding. You start with an idea, and your goal is to transfer that idea into the mind of your reader or the computer. Good code runs efficiently. The machine performs exactly as the programmer intends, but bad code, it misfires. It causes errors, ambiguity, and confusion. Amateur programmers might rely on memorized scripts or AI no-code tools, but great programmers understand how the computer processes information. That understanding of the machine architecture lets them write code that runs smoothly and effectively, and writing works the same way. If you want to write well, you need to abandon surface-level tricks and study these 4 features of your reader's mind so that you can shape your writing to fit. So the first step to brain-optimized writing is to understand that readers have a pretty tough job. They're managing 2 levels of reading at the same time, which is kind of like skiing. If the skis start pulling in different directions, then your reader is in trouble. But expert writers know how to keep them in line so that readers have a smooth ride. So what are those 2 skis? Well, it works like this. As everyone knows, we can build a ton of different sentences using the same pieces. So these ones right here are adapted from a passage in Steven Pinker's book, The Language Instinct. Even though the information is exactly the same, each sentence tells a different story. Why is that? Here's why. Since we read from left to right, readers perceive the thing that they read first to be the star of the show. Let's call it the topic. It's the thing that the sentence tells a story about. And understanding what the sentence is about, that's the first ski. But while readers are busy figuring out what the sentence is all about, they're also trying to manage a second ski. And when you read this passage, you'll understand what happens when that second ski starts to pull away from the first one. Now, just a warning, this is gonna seem pretty difficult to read, but that's exactly the point, and don't worry about it because we're gonna fix it next. Language is not a cultural artifact that we learn, the way we learn to tell time or how the federal government works. Instead, the biological makeup of our brains is comprised of language, among other distinct pieces. Children develop language spontaneously without conscious effort or formal instruction. You don't have to be aware of its underlying logic to deploy it. Every individual possesses the same language qualitatively, and the more general abilities to process information or behave intelligently are themselves distinct from language. Whew! Now, I don't know about you, but personally, I found that passage pretty difficult to follow. And it's interesting to understand what made it so difficult to understand. Because while you were busy reading that passage, your brain was managing the first ski, which is, what's this sentence all about? That is, what's the topic? And when you look at each sentence individually, it's pretty easy to understand what they're all about. But when you zoom out, it becomes harder to answer the second question, and that is, what's this passage about? Is the passage about language or biology or children, you, everyone, general abilities? We can't tell. So the problem with this passage is that the topics are all over the place. Each sentence is telling a different story, so the reader wants to know, how do they all hang together? What are they doing together? Kind of like an impressionist painting. Writing is interpreted at different levels of resolution, so it's not enough to just focus on the sentence level. Readers also want to know the meaning of that larger passage, and that's the second ski. Whether it's a paragraph, a section, a chapter, or a book, the larger unit of writing sets the context for how any individual sentence is going to be interpreted, so the reader needs to clearly see how each sentence relates to its larger context. That's why sentence-level grammar advice isn't enough. If you want to help your readers keep track of how these sentences fit into the larger pattern, then you need to zoom out and follow these 3 steps. First, Choose the topics of your sentences carefully and try to make them the subject of your sentence. So since this passage is about language, let's reorganize the sentences so that they all share a common topic. Second, try to make sure that the topics are short, concrete, and familiar. Readers can't really picture abstract topics, such as the more general abilities to process information or behave intelligently. So try to make sure that the topics are easy for the readers to grasp and visualize, because clear writing is visual. It activates the mind's eye. Third, don't vary the topics just for the sake of variety. Yes, many writing teachers will tell you to avoid repetition, but they're only looking at the sentence level. Repeating the topic can help the reader see what the larger passage is about globally. So pulling all that advice together to fix that first passage, we would get something more like this. Language is not a cultural artifact that we learn the way we learn to tell time or how the federal government works. Instead, it is a distinct piece of the biological makeup of our brains. Language is a complex, specialized skill which develops in the child spontaneously, without conscious effort or formal instruction. Language is deployed without awareness of its underlying logic. Language is qualitatively the same in every individual, and it is distinct from more general abilities to process information or behave intelligently. Trigger warning, this next brain-optimized writing trick I'm going to show you is pretty controversial, at least according to the rule-based writing teachers. But when you stop worrying about writing rules and focus instead on writing tools, then you'll be able to write prose that flows like water. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. Microphone check 1, 2. We all know that feeling of flow, when you get so wrapped up in reading something that you completely lose track of time and forget everything else around you. It's the hallmark of the world's best writing. But that's only a description of flow. We writers want to know why it happens, and more importantly, how can we design writing that gives our readers that experience of flow? Speaking of flow, here are 2 sentences from its leading researcher, Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi. Yes, that's how you pronounce his name, Csikszentmihalyi. Now these are 2 different versions of the same sentence, and you're going to see why in a second, but the sentences are, each person must prepare for the condition of happiness, cultivate it, and defend it privately. Happiness, in fact, is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. The question is, which of these sentences makes the following passage flow better? Happiness is not something that happens. It is not the result of good fortune or random chance. It is not something that money can buy or power command. It does not depend on outside events, but rather on how we interpret them. One of those sentences is the missing piece of the puzzle, so choose the right one to make this passage flow. People who learn to control inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their lives, which is as close as any of us can come to being happy. Now, if you're a grammarian, then you've probably already spotted that the difference between these 2 sentences is the voice. 2A is in the active voice, and 2B is in the passive voice. And the passive voice is forbidden by rules-based writing teachers, including Strunk and White. But you don't need to be a grammar nerd in order to see that the second sentence just seems to make the passage flow better. Why is that? Well, if you ask me, I think the passive voice works so well here for 2 reasons. First, since the topic of every sentence that came before it is happiness, it makes sense to continue that pattern. But more importantly, notice how the last 3 words of 2B introduce a new important character by each person. And notice how that character appears in the topic of the next sentence. Now, if we went with the rules-based writing teachers and avoided the passive voice in favor of the active voice, then these links would be completely reversed. So no matter what the rules-based writing teachers say, the passive voice in this sentence just works better because the first few words link back to what we just read, and the last few words link forward to the beginning of the next sentence. And that's the key to writing that flows. It's for the sentence to act like runners in a relay race. One picks up where the other one left off. That means following the old to new framework. Old information at the beginning of the sentence, new, unanticipated information at the end of the sentence. Now, do you ever wonder why you can recognize the face of somebody who you met years ago, even though you forgot their name like 5 minutes after you just met? I always thought I was just bad with names, but it turns out that there's a really good psychological reason for this that has to do with the way that our brains record memories. And when writers understand this, they can hijack that part of the brain to make their writing more vivid and memorable. But instead of just telling you about the nature of memory, I'm about to show you with 3 short sentences. I mean, after all, it's show, don't tell. Am I right? Your job is simple. Focus on each sentence for about 7 seconds and just try to remember the idea. Remember the capital of Indonesia. Remember the first line of Hey Jude. Remember the Mona Lisa. Now, did you notice anything change as we moved from one sentence to the other? Just to be sure, let's try 3 more. Again, just focus on the sentence and try to remember. Remember the house where you spent most of your childhood. Remember the definition of truth. Remember the definition of watermelon. If every sentence felt a little bit different, it's because each one was asking you to perform different kinds of mental activities. Remembering the capital of Indonesia is pretty straightforward. It's just a quick, factual recall. That is, unless you actually live in Jakarta, in which case it probably felt more concrete and personal. But when you were remembering Hey Jude, you weren't thinking of a fact. You probably heard the melody in your head, Paul McCartney's voice and the piano chords, almost like you were playing the song in your mind. Remembering the Mona Lisa, well, there's a pretty good chance that you pictured that famous half smile on her face. It's like your brain is pulling up an image from some mental gallery. And remembering your childhood home, suddenly you're not just remembering a fact or an image, instead it's more like the smell of dinner in the kitchen, the sound of the floors creaking and the layout of the rooms. You might feel like you're actually walking through that home again in your mind. Remembering the definition of truth is not as simple as recalling a city name or a painting. You know what truth means, but you might not have a neat, ready-made definition, so you probably had to pause and think it through and come up with a definition that feels right in the moment. Watermelon is another interesting one. Just hearing the word might make you picture its red fruit, the taste of its sweetness, or a memory of a time when you ate it. Then if I asked you to give a definition of it, you'd have to shift gears, going from those sensory memories to trying to put it into words. The point here is that remembering is not just one thing. As this experiment shows, memory is a whole range of mental activities, each one calling up different parts of our own inner world. That's why it's easier to remember faces than it is names, and it's also why you should try to make sure that your writing gives the reader more than just information. We don't remember words, we remember images, human actions, and sensory information. The visual part of our brain is way older than the part that evolved for language. So here are 3 simple steps that you can use to make sure that your writing is visual and memorable. Choose concrete language and examples. Don't say, "I was in Jakarta." Describe the sights, the sounds, the smells, and the feelings that readers can associate with that place. Try to write about flesh and blood characters. And if you must write about abstractions like truth, then try to turn them into visual characters by making them the subjects of verbs that tell a story. The next point about brain-optimized writing is organized as follows. First, the reader's attention will be hooked with a sudden change of tone. Second, a 3-part framework will be used to establish the problem and set up the solution. Then, an example of the problem will be provided. From there, an explanation of the relationship between the example and the problem will be provided. Did I lose you? No wonder! I was using the same format that writers have been using since the Roman Empire. And back then, that format actually had a purpose. But why are we still writing that way today? Readers find it so boring and dull. How many times have you come across passages like this? Chapter 2 discusses the social factors that lead to declining birth rates. The preceding paragraph demonstrates that economic conditions play a significant role in declining birth rates. The previous section analyzed the economic factors contributing to declining birth rates. This section raises the question of their impact on labor shortages. The final topic to be discussed is policy responses. These passages all suffer from meta-discourse. That's writing about writing. Meta-discourse is like a street sign, giving GPS coordinates within the text. It's also known in writing as signposting, and it's a hangover from an old trick in rhetoric. Tell them what you're going to tell them, Tell them, and then tell them what you told them. That rule made a lot of sense back when public speaking was more dominant than writing. People giving speeches needed to figure out a way to keep the audience's mind from wandering. So they would repeat points and let people know explicitly what's coming up. And we still use meta discourse all the time in regular conversation. But in writing, this kind of signposting is totally unnecessary. You don't need to hold your reader's hand and constantly point out where you're going. Good writing takes readers on an easy journey. If the path to the destination is clearly laid out, then you don't need to pull over every 15 minutes to check a map. Instead, here's how you can manage expectations in your writing so that readers can sit back and enjoy the ride. Signpost sparingly, as we do in conversation. One way to introduce topics in conversation is by asking a question. So instead of saying chapter 2 discusses the social factors that lead to declining birth rates, you could just say, what social factors make birth rates decline? Use visual language. Treat the content like something that's happening in the world rather than just on the page. You could say, as we have seen, economic conditions play a significant role in declining birth rates. Visual language like this is great because seeing implies seers. So we're no longer having to refer to the text demonstrating this or arguing that. In other words, the main characters in the story are not the units of discourse. It's the writer and the reader who are taking part in the spectacle together. Now, in addition to vision, writers and readers can move together and cooperate on projects. So you can talk about arriving to or finishing with a topic. Now that we have seen the economic factors contributing to declining birth rates, we arrive at the question of their impact on labor shortages. The final topic to be discussed is policy responses. Let's finish with policy responses. Getting rid of meta discourse is a great way to clarify your writing. But if clear writing is what you want, then it's not enough to simply delete all the meta discourse. You've got to know how to organize what's left over. So watch this video next, because it's going to show you 3 tricks for writing great sentences that will ensure that your reader has a smooth journey through your next text. So be sure to go check it out.